So if you don't already know, Turnitin is a service to help with original writing and giving feedback to students, and also for instructors to help save time. And you've already talked about, you've already gotten a beautiful introduction. Thank you very much. So I'm Gabby, and again, this is Robert. And before we get started, I want to talk a teeny bit about integrity. Why is it so important? I mean, it seems to be coming up again and again in the news, whether it's a politician who's plagiarized on their graduate paper, or something else in the news with faculty cheating, or even now, especially in Australia, there's a lot of students who are doing a lot of cheating and they're getting profiled for it in local newspapers. So this is really important, and we care about it so much because it affects our society. We don't want to go to a doctor who cut corners in a school, or drive across a bridge where the architect didn't do the work in the class ahead of time. So this is important for us as a society. And I know those are elementary examples, but it is that important and that deep. And one other kind of housekeeping thing, and just for a quick review, so Turnitin is the company name, but Feedback Studio, and what we're talking about today, is actually the service. So a lot of times we use those interchangeably because it's just Turnitin, right? This is what it looks like when you're within a paper, and then these are the 3 active layers that we're probably going to be covering today. The first in blue is the grading layer, which is where you're providing feedback as an instructor. And anything in red is a similarity, and that's where the matches come, or the plagiarism, or where things aren't cited correctly. And the third layer, which we may or may not have experience with, is the Ets E-Rater Layer. And that typically shows up in purple. There's a lot here in this example. And that covers punctuation, grammar, mechanics, usage feedback. So this, you can have it turned on and have it show up that feedback automatically and use it. So you don't have to write that yourself. It'll just show up. So it's just a little bit of background, giving more context in what we'll talk about today. Okay, so for the 10 best practices, the first one is set the stage for your students. We'll talk about what plagiarism comes from. So we looked at 117 million papers, and 81% of those had some similarity match to them. Now the question is, did all those 81 students cheat? No. Only about, maybe you'd say 14% of those students cheated. This is where they have 50% or more of the content in their paper highly unoriginal. And this stuff here is just either chance, syntax, maybe it's the topic itself, lends itself to matching other content. So this is where you tend to be worried. Now, have you had a match over 50% on any of your papers?
Not that my professors have noted me on.
We're going to talk later. So when somebody matches 50% or higher, that's a big flag for us. And within that 50%, 82% of those papers match another student's paper. That's what we're really looking for. Second match is about 37% matches internet. Anything they pulled off the internet, including Wikipedia. And then 7% is matching other publications like JAMA or other, possibly even textbook content here. So the first thing that's important for students is to understand what plagiarism is, and talk about that, define what it is, including plagiarizing yourself. So if you're using content from a previous class and then you're using parts of it in your new assignment, technically if you don't cite yourself, that is considered plagiarism. And the second thing to talk about when you're launching Turnitin with your course is to talk about what the similarity score is and what that percentage means. A lot of times there's anxiety for students when they come back and they get like a 30% and they're like, does this mean that I cheated? I didn't cheat. And there's a lot of panic or uncertainty. So really setting like guidelines on what that means, what you're looking for, and how to interpret that for students is really important. And Robert's going to talk a little bit further about that. And the third thing is just the policy. So you have set up in your syllabus, okay, what happens if plagiarism is found? What is that policy? Write it down, have it in your syllabus so students know exactly what procedure is going to be followed at that point. And this is a nice resource we'll look at a little bit further. It's plagiarism.org. So this kind of does some of the heavy lifting for you, and it really describes what plagiarism is. There's a lot of resources on here, including videos for students and videos for faculty members talking about what plagiarism looks like, examples of it in papers. There's a lot of resources here, and this is just a screenshot, but we can go into this further later. But I recommend, at the very least, you might want to list this in your syllabus as a resource for students. Number 2, consistency and convenience. Anyone experience Turnitin rubrics? Okay, a couple. Great. So the rubrics here are meant to be very easy to use. You can, there's a library of rubrics already set up that you can pull from, and you can edit those to make them your own, or you can start from a clean slate, write your own rubric. And then you can see later, you can use a little toggle switch or like a slider switch while you're grading to move each area for what percentage you give it. So we'll look at that. Third one, this is more of a pedagogical recommendation, and that is assigning drafts. So you can assign a draft to a student to say, okay, in week 2 or week 8, your paper's due here. And then week 10, I actually am going to require you to submit that paper again. But having looked at the Turnitin feedback comment and your instructor feedback comment, respond to it and then turn it in a second time. So there's a lot of instructors that use Turnitin as a drafting process and assign grades along the way. And what they're doing is having students read all the feedback and react to it, and so there's learning happening. So it really increases the engagement. This kind of matches with 3. A lot of faculty came out and recommended in our survey that you require students to go through the feedback within the report and react to it, and they assign grades within their course in doing that. This is a very weak example, and I'm sure this doesn't really make sense, but these are the drag and drop quick comments. And then here is 13. This shows that this is, it's showing that this is a citation matching somewhere else in the world. And then this is another comment here. This is me making an example. This isn't quite really a true plagiarism problem. So you would, in this case, you would ask students to go through and look at these pieces of feedback and somehow address them and actually score that or make that as part of the assignment, just to make sure that they're really internalizing the feedback that you're giving them and learning from it. And if the learning didn't occur, then you can have a deeper conversation. Next, quality feedback. So we did another piece of research, spanned over 29 months. That many papers, and faculty left 12 million quick marks, which are those drag and drop marks. And we did a little word cloud to show what most faculty use as far as quick marks: missing comma, awkward, word choice error, citation source. This is probably not a surprise either. So with quick marks, you can use the sets that we have as recommended, and you're always welcome to set up your own set. So you can make your own drag and drops that are applicable to the topics that you're teaching, and then once you set those up, you are free to share those with other faculty or people in your department. And this is a blown up piece of what quick marks looks like. Another piece for quality feedback is when you drag and drop this content over. If it's coming from the library, a student can click on it and it actually describes what vague means. So you've got that extra feedback right there. Again, the point is to save time and make it easy, and also make it all that feedback uniform across all of your students. Voice comments. Did you know that you were allowed to use voice comments for your feedback? So it's a summative feedback tool, so you can leave 3-minute voice comment about the entire paper. And I find this really helpful just in teaching and providing some positive feedback. Because you go through this paper and you mark all the things that are wrong, you don't like, or that are a problem. So it's good to add, a little bit of connection with your student and leave something that says, look, I'm going to talk about the things that work really well and the way you approach this design or something. So it's a nice way to connect and also kind of soften all of that with some positive feedback on the writing that they did do well. And also you have the choice of using this if you want, and or you can write a summative comment here as well. That it's a comment for the student that is kind of over on the side, so it's not related to any particular comment in the paper. And then the similarity reports that you see can be downloaded to one summative feedback. This is just one page of that. This is a beautiful feature of Feedback Studio that I don't think a lot of people know about. This is only one screen, and Robert's going to show you other ones, but it's really easy to use. The first page looks like this. It shows a similarity index, and then it matches the colors to the feedback on the following pages. So each page after this shows the particular feedback and the link it's to, and it helps students understand the comments that you have, and also gives you something to have a discussion about. So a lot of times faculty will have students download that paper, come into their office during office hours, and then have that conversation. And so it's a nice tool to use as a foundation for that conversation. Course naming convention, this is something that came up in the feedback from faculty that they said was really important. And that is when you're naming your classes, I don't know if you have control over this or if it's through your administration, but to include the year, the class period, and the semester. And that's really helpful, especially if you have one paper later in the future that's matching back to another paper. It says it matches to this other paper, and it's going to state this class name in it, so it's really helpful for you to track that. The second one, if you are logging in directly to Turnitin and not using it through an integration, then you can also use this recommendation that faculty shared here about distributing the enrollment password and then changing it after all your classes are enrolled so you don't have any duplicate or unauthorized students. Ets E-Rater, that's the purple feedback that I mentioned earlier. Anybody currently use Ets E-Rater feedback? A little bit? Okay. I've gotten feedback, half the time professors love it because it saves them all the time to have to mark up and spend time on, comma, or it's spelled wrong, and it takes all that off of your plate. But there's another set of faculty that find that it's not always as accurate as they want it to be or as precise as they want it to be. And so the school can turn this offer on at the global level. And then also you as a faculty member can turn that offer on within a particular course or assignment. And then even if you get that purple feedback, if you don't agree with it, you can delete it so your student doesn't see it. There's an example of it now. So not only will it mark this automatically, there's a hyphen needed, student again can roll over it and then it gets a little bit more description right there. All right, and 10, peer reviews. A beautiful feature that's really nice for students to be able to read and comment on each other's papers. It's a very nice instructional tool to help give students perspective and also help with their learning. And this is an example of what that looks like. Occupy actually may not be spelled incorrectly, but that's just an example. Anybody use PeerMark currently? Okay. So those are the 10 best practices that were shared with us by the faculty that currently use Feedback Studio. So Robert's going to dive in and actually walk through those within the system, and then we can talk about it, have discussion, or answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Gabby. Just plug in here. Okay, so towards the beginning, Gabby talked about setting the stage with students to help them understand a little bit better about what plagiarism is and how to avoid it, and through that process becoming better writers. Also, I think that instructors tend to like to have tools to help to explain this better, because it may not be always something that's easy or simple to talk about with students. Sometimes plagiarism can be unintentional, and they don't always understand what it is. They may have a very simplistic view of plagiarism as a very intentional way of cheating, but that's not always the case. So we do provide resources at plagiarism.org to make it easier to explain this to students within our native interface, logging in directly, there is a link we provide directly to plagiarism.org. If you're using Turnitin Feedback Studio inside of a learning management system like Canvas, Blackboard, or Sakai, for example, you may perhaps want to link to this so that students have a way to gain access to this information. So at plagiarism.org, there are a number of different ways you can navigate, from understanding plagiarism to preventing plagiarism. A few areas that could help students tremendously. First, understanding it and then how to prevent it. So presented here, you'll see that we have a number of videos on the page that can be shown to students. And we found that sometimes instructors may show these in class, depending on what they may find is their favorite. And there are quite a few. We have a large number of videos here available. So it's something we encourage you as an instructor to take a look at, perhaps go through some, and if you find that this could be helpful for you in your classes to show to students, you can show videos to help explain this better. So there are videos explaining it, and it's presented in a gentle way, in a way that you want to help them understand it better. So I mentioned too, there's preventing plagiarism and videos there around that, in addition to some articles. We also have teaching about plagiarism resources with videos that can help there. So we kind of categorize these many videos that are available that we've linked to so that it's easy to focus in on the category that makes most sense for you and how you want to present this information. Additionally, there are areas around plagiarism checking. These are videos and some articles I think that are really helpful for instructors to think a little bit more about what may be occurring in your classes. It's not always something that instructors are thinking about to this level. For example, you see there's a video here talking about ghostwriting, for example, or understanding the public domain and citation. So these tools at plagiarism.org are not only for students to understand better, but also for instructors to understand better what might be happening, what's currently going on in this area. Gabby also talked about consistency and convenience when she was talking earlier, and ways that we can use Turnitin Feedback Studio in a way that make it convenient for you to provide feedback around grading. And one of those ways is with our rubric tools. When creating a Turnitin Feedback Studio assignment, whether it is at Turnitin.com or you're doing it through your learning management system, you'll see as you go through all of your assignment settings that you can add a rubric to the assignment. So that grading rubric would be part of the grading layer in Feedback Studio, where you can apply points to rubric criteria and you can set and adjust your scales. We do have a site that has pre-built rubrics already available that you can upload directly to Feedback Studio. You also have the ability to create them yourself. So from here, from our teaching tools, it's possible to upload them. And if I launch the Rubric Manager, you'll see here I have one already uploaded where you have criteria over on the left with these rows and scales for columns across the top.
Could you modify one of the templates?
You can. So if you were to upload a template or a pre-existing rubric, what we recommend is that you click in the upper left and duplicate first. So it may not let you edit it first because it's already static, but you can duplicate the rubric, and if you duplicate the rubric, you can change the name and you can make adjustments in all the specifics, including point values and weights. Importing and exporting is very easy too, and it is possible to import from an Excel spreadsheet as well. You just need to make sure it fits our formatting guidelines and rules that are set. And if you attempt to import from an Excel spreadsheet, it will tell you exactly how you need to format in order to convert it.
But you could export, right, and then modify and then re-upload it?
Your export would always be a .rbc file format, which means that it was created in Feedback Studio. What you download from the site could be an RBC format, meaning you can import it in, There's also a Word format, but that's specifically, if you go to download a rubric and then import it, the Word format is simply for an easy to print format that's very easy to view and look at that you can save or print. One thing I wanted to quickly mention too around rubrics is that this is our standard rubric form, but there are two other ways that you can work with rubrics. There's also the custom rubric, where you can enter values directly in each cell. So rather than having a column limited to a specific point value or a row limited to a specific weight, instead you can enter point values in each cell individually to customize your rubric and how the scoring works. There was also a question or comment earlier around what if you set up a rough draft and you're not going to grade that rough draft, because there are ways of doing that as well. You don't have to have a point value associated with a Turnitin assignment. We also have a qualitative rubric form that has no point values or weights. So everything here is just wide open for you to structure the way that you see fit. So we try to provide flexibility here, make it convenient, but allow you to be consistent in how you do things. So not only can you create your own rubrics, you can import them, export them, and edit them. And if you wanted to create your own rubric, it's just as simple as clicking in the upper left, clicking Create New Rubric, and then you get a blank slate to fill in for all these values. You can add additional rows and columns very simply here. So, along with what we talked about with consistency, also keep in mind that administrators at a school can make a rubric available to all at the institution tied to the account. And if you export rubrics that you create, you can share them with your colleagues. So if you find that there's a rubric you want to design for a department, you could share that rubric across the department. Very easy to do. Another thing that was discussed was around assigning drafts, going from perhaps a rough draft to a final draft, or even going through that process in 3 or 4 steps, depending on the class that you're teaching, and utilizing Feedback Studio to your benefit. Now, what I'm showing here is from our native website. If you were using Turnitin directly on our website, you can create a base paper assignment, and then a revision assignment, which would be a revision of that other assignment, which would be the original paper. One thing to keep in mind, and I'm thinking in terms of how most of you probably use Feedback Studio, is that you're using it in a learning management system like Canvas, Sakai, or Blackboard. So if you're using it through a learning management system, you won't have the revision option, so to speak, but you have the ability to create multiple assignments, as many as you want. One key thing to remember when you do this: if you create multiple assignments and the earlier drafts are rough drafts, make sure that you're not adding those to the student paper repository. Because if I were to create, say, a base assignment for a rough draft and then another assignment for the final draft, and set it up so that that first assignment does add the papers to the repository, you could get false matches later because it's been added to the repository. And typically, it's something we recommend, that papers go to the repository in general, but make sure if you're doing multiple drafts that you don't add the earlier drafts. Another thing I should probably mention when it comes to drafts is that you do have the ability to allow resubmissions in a single assignment. You'll see that option pop up during assignment creation. But it's important to remember that when you do resubmissions in a single assignment, it overwrites previous drafts. Different learning management systems may handle this in different ways, but we recommend that through your LMS, when you want to have a rough draft, final draft, or even more drafts, that you create separate assignments and label them specifically for that. Also, I wanted to mention here, this was talked about later, but with naming conventions, while it's presented here on the screen, Gabby mentioned that when you're creating your assignments, it's helpful to use very specific naming conventions. This is helpful in the future if you were to decide to figure out exactly what was going on with a specific assignment on the back end. With most of our integrations, you can log into Turnitin.com directly and access previous assignments. So a very quick and easy way to identify them would be to be very specific in your naming conventions. So with the class title, the year, the section number, the semester, and school, as specific as you would like to get based on your preferences, I think it's a good idea to add specifics around your assignments. It just makes it easier to circle back later to identify specific assignments that you used in the past. So when it comes to feedback, I'm going to jump ahead here and get into Feedback Studio. So what you'll notice, regardless of how you use it, whether it's through an LMS or through our site, is that once a student has submitted a paper, you're presented with a color and a percentage. You can click through in order to get to the document viewer with Feedback Studio, and now we have our layers presented. So if you were to create multiple drafts the way that we were just talking about, I think it's incredibly helpful to provide a lot of feedback on that rough draft so that students can benefit from that feedback when they do their final draft. So with the feedback layer, and this ties into quality feedback, voice comments, and some other things that are available through the feedback layer. So a number of the best practices can be talked about just with this layer alone. So in providing feedback, our quick marks are very easy to use drag and drop or insertable comments that I can simply drag and drop onto the paper. I'll turn off the similarity layer and just focus on feedback for right now. So with quick marks, you can drag and drop, or I can just click directly on the paper and select quick mark and insert one. When clicking on a quick mark, a student and you as the instructor can get specifics around what that mark means, and you can even tie it to the rubric. So a specific criterion can be tied directly to that mark. Not only that, you can add your own specific instructor comments to the mark. And link to text, use bold, italic, or underline. Now see how the mark changes. If I add an instructor comment, there's a bubble. If I tie it to the rubric, you get a rubric indicator inside of the bubble. When you're viewing the rubric later, you can also see when comments and how many comments have been tied to a criterion. So you see this bubble with a 1 in it, that displays right there. You can also add your own comments. So if I add my own comment to the paper, by clicking the bubble comment option, I then add my own comment. Now, I always like to mention, if you find that you're leaving the same comment over and over again, you can just convert it to a quick mark quickly. So I made that comment, I'm finding I'm leaving it on many papers. I just want to make things simpler. I'll convert it to a quick mark, give it a name, decide which quick mark set it belongs in, and then it'll be there going forward. So for example, in this quick mark set, I have some that are custom quick marks that I made on the fly while I was commenting on papers. So it's very easy to work with. If you were to utilize the commenting tools on a rough draft, then students could benefit from that for their final draft. And keep in mind too that you can highlight portions of the paper. Say I choose a quick mark around that, and I can even color code it based on my personal preferences. And when providing feedback, you can do fun things like strike throughs and cross things out as well. Or as I click and I want to explain why, I can add inline comments to explain it. Very easy to use. So students can then react to that feedback and have better final drafts based on what you've provided to them. So we talked about feedback, we talked about quick marks. Also, you can leave summative comments on a paper, general comments for the student once you've marked it. In the feedback summary, I have the ability to leave voice comments up to 3 minutes long. I'm recording myself right now. Once I'm done recording, I just hit stop. I can play it back.
I have the ability to leave voice comments.
If I like it, I can save it or I can trash it and start over. You can also leave comments, text comments as well. Summative comments about the paper for overall feedback. So we have multiple layers in here. We just talked about comments and ways to provide feedback. We also have, in addition to the similarity layer, the Ets E-Rater grammar check, which is through a partnership we have with ETS, providing a grammar check layer on top of the others. So now what we see in purple is what has been identified with possible issues by ETS. As an instructor, you can add your own comments to these as well. You can link directly to an ETS handbook to get more specifics, even toggle the level of handbook, or flip to the English Learner's Handbook. So students can toggle too, not just instructors. Instructors choose the default. Students could, if the English Learner's Handbook would benefit them more, flip to it and have that specific feedback. Now, finally, a few things. Well, now that I have all the layers turned on, there's a download option that allows you to print not only the similarity report, but all the feedback in one place. So if I do the download current view, it takes me to a PDF. So I can save that PDF or I can print that PDF, and it takes all the information from the similarity report, from the grading layer, as far as comments and feedback that you've provided, and it includes ETS as well. So it just takes everything and puts it all in one place. You have the title, author, submission information, an image, including all the marks, but it goes even deeper than that. If I scroll past that, you have the specifics around the similarity report. You have the exclusions that were involved here as well. Then with the grade mark report, you have the grade, whether there was a voice comment left, page by page specifics for every mark and comment. And then, this is usually my favorite part at the end, where we have the rubric details, because it not only shows what was selected by the instructor in black, but it also shows in gray what was not selected. So I, as a student, could view this and say, okay, I only had 3 points under ideas and content. I want 4. What do I have to do to improve? So I can read this and say, okay, this is what I did, and then in gray right above it, here's what I need to do even better. So this PDF can be saved or printed, so all that feedback is in one place. Last thing, very briefly, is that with peer review, students can comment and mark each other's papers and answer the specific questions chosen by the instructor. So you would have marking tools available for the student and highlighting tools if you want them to do that. But the main piece is the questions you select and how they answer them. And then all the comments are summed up as well in a separate tab.